Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Crimson Kitchen. Today, Chef Akeisha Hayde is going to teach us how to make sweet potato and black bean chili. As you heard, this session is being recorded. If you have questions, please post them in the chat.
All right. So let me just see if I can see everyone. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. As Krista said, my name is Akeisha Hayde, the Executive Chef for Residential Dining at Harvard University. And today I am going to show you guys what I call a fun but yet simple chili. One of the reasons why I like this recipe is because it can be done vegan, vegetarian, with meat, without meat. I mean, any of your preferences you can use this recipe for. So that's one of the main reasons why I really like it. But it's also at the end of this recipe, I really want to show you multiple ways of storing this dish, but also using it. So a lot of times, you know, you make chili, you put it in a big bowl and you just eat it kind of like a stew. But with this particular recipe, you can eat it over rice. You can eat it with tortillas. You can use it for nachos. I mean, the options are kind of endless with this one. With 4th of July coming up, it's also a great item to take to a cookout because you can smother it on hot dogs. You can put it on hamburgers. You can eat it by itself. I mean, it's just a really versatile recipe. So as we start with it, if you have questions, please feel free to post it as I'll be cooking this dish fully on screen with you. So there will be times while things are cooking that I have to answer questions. So I'm going to start off this dish today. So I have my pot here getting nice and hot for me, and I'm going to start that on almost a high heat. One of the great things with chilies is that it can be used and stored and used over and over again for multiple preparations. Every time I make chili, I never make a small batch because I just feel like it's so much easier to make a big quantity and freeze some of it. And then, you know, sometimes you come home in the afternoon and you're rushing, you have something you can pop in the microwave, but yet it's fresh and homemade. Okay, so anytime you're making a recipe like this, try and double up on it so that way you have some extras to hold in the freezer. So as you guys can see, my pan is heated. There's no special pans or pots or anything needed for this. Just a nice pan that can hold all the ingredients and is good for stewing that won't burn quickly. So I'm going to start off to my pot by adding some olive oil. And for this dish in particular, there isn't a whole lot of different seasonings because we're really going to be building flavors with the ingredients that we're adding to this. So we're starting off here, making sure oil is nice and hot. So I'll just give that about another second or two. And when we add the onions to this, we really want this to be just sauteed lightly. Okay. So I'm going to toss in my onions. And like I said, the good thing, if you have a slow cooker, you can use your slow cooker for this. It's also a great slow cooker recipe. You dump everything in, set it for a few hours, walk away, and come back to a great meal, okay? So a slow cooker is your next option for this. You can also do it in a nice Dutch oven in the oven. So there's multiple ways of doing this recipe. So to this, I'm also going to add my diced jalapenos. I'm using one whole jalapeno because I like things a little spicy, but I really didn't use the seeds, so it's really not going to be that spicy, but more flavorful, okay? So here I have my onions and jalapenos in so far. And then for this, I'm also going to add some garlic, and my garlic, all I did was grate it up on my microplane, so I have that going as well. And I'm telling you guys, even if you can't cook, from the time you add these 3 ingredients to the pan, your entire house is going to smell amazing. Okay? It's going to smell like you've been just cooking all day long. And to this, we're also going to add the cumin. And this is also going to help us develop that flavor in the cumin and brighten it up because it's going to help toast while it's here in the oil and cook those onions nicely and just really build some flavor in our pan. So as you can see, our onions have started to get nice and translucent, which is what we're looking for. Now, the next thing I'm going to add is the only ingredient that really takes a little bit of time to cook, which is our diced sweet potatoes. Okay, so to the pan, see how nice we have our veggies sauteed here? I'm gonna add those sweet potatoes. All right. And I'm gonna let that cook for a second or two. So any questions thus far?
I just posted a reminder about where the recipe for this dish is and all the videos for the previous cooking classes, if anybody wants those. Chef, a question, when you're dicing all your vegetables, is it important to make sure that they're diced kind of all at the same size?
I will say yes, but I'm also going to say if there's one or two that's a little bit bigger than the other, I would not get too crazy about it. It's a stew, so it actually looks much more homemade when things aren't as perfect. But yes, to cook evenly, the closer sizes together, the better it is. But I won't get all overly anxious if it isn't all the same.
And if I'm not somebody who likes heat, how do I use just less of the pepper?
You can use less of the pepper. You can also use no pepper. You can do a dash of Tabasco, or you can do a sweet Italian chili or any other sweet pepper, which means it has a peppery flavor without the heat. So you can easily substitute. All right. So to this, I have my sweet potatoes and onions that's been cooking. As you can see, some of my sweet potatoes started on taking on a little bit of color or caramelization, which is actually not a bad thing. Okay, so as you can see right here, so that's nice. So now to this, we're going to add our corn. And to this, I use a bunch of different types of corn. I can use canned corn, frozen corn, roasted corn. It really doesn't matter. It just depends on what you like. And then I'm going to add in my black beans. And as you can see how colorful that looks already. And we're not even close just yet. All right. So the next thing we're going to add, and this is going to be the longest part of the process, is some stock. Today I am using a little bit of vegetable stock. Now, the reminder, I said you can use vegetable stock, chicken stock, beef stock, basically any type of stock. What you do want to remember is the type of stock you use will determine how much salt, pepper, and spices you would need. Because obviously if your stock has more flavor, then you take less time building a lot more extra flavor. But if you use a bland stock, then you will need to add a little bit more seasoning at the end, okay? So while this, I'm gonna cover this up so it comes to a boil. And once that comes to a boil, then we're gonna add our peppers and tomatoes and kind of finish this up. So this version that I'm showing you here is a pretty quick version. Obviously, if you want it to cook longer, you just set it on a low heat. But I mean, you can eat it pretty straight out of the pot, but I always recommend letting it sit. And I feel like chilies are always even better the next day. So while I have my pot heating up, I'm actually going to grate some cheese that we're going to use for the finished product to garnish with. So if you guys have questions while I'm grating the cheese, now would be a great time. Or if you need any pointers and making other types of chili, that would also be more than welcome.
Talk a little bit about cooking this recipe in a slow cooker. Sometimes slow cooker recipes require you to cook things on the stove for a little bit before you put them in the slow cooker. other recipes let you just throw everything in its raw state. What do you suggest for this recipe?
I would suggest throwing everything into the slow cooker with the exception of the cilantro. And once everything is cooked and nice and you're stewing, and you take your slow cooker off, then you add the cilantro because then the flavor is much more bright and fresh. If you were to leave the cilantro in from the beginning, it just kind of gets lost, and the flavor isn't really there. So that's my only thing.
You don't need to like saute the onions in advance or anything like that. Nice. All right.
If you're doing it in the pot, you might as well build the flavors, but if you're doing it in a slow cooker, they all meld together eventually.
Terrific. How long in the slow cooker?
It's really, it depends on the type of slow cooker you have, but I would say at least 2 to 3 hours, because you want to make sure those sweet potatoes are tender. The one good thing with the slow cooker is that you're not constantly mixing it and breaking things up. So that's a good thing. So with the slow cooker, if you do about 2.5 to 3 hours, you should be good.
And have you ever tried cooking this in an Instant Pot?
I don't have an Instant Pot, so whoever is so fancy and has an Instant Pot, I don't have one, so I couldn't tell you. But it's very similar to, from what I know of the Instant Pots, I think it's very similar to a cross between a crock pot and a pressure cooker. So I'm sure there are settings that you can use for it, but I personally haven't used the Instant Pot just yet.
Fair enough.
All right.
Do we have any other questions from our audience? Chef, I'll ask another question.
Yep.
Talk about spices blooming, and I know that I know that different dishes use different spices, and you're talking a little bit about the fact that you feel like this dish is even better tomorrow. Does that have anything to do with your spices kind of blooming?
I think it's very little of that, but I think it's more of the ingredients just gets to hang out and chill out together. In layman terms, they just get to hang and really melt together. Once you take a stew or something like that off the stove, everything still is at different temperatures and textures, but by the time it cools the next day, I think everything just kind of settles down and is really forming more of a bond together. But yes, the spices do get to bloom a little bit more, but it's more of that consistent flavor throughout the dish more than anything else.
Maybe that's why it's called chili, because they all get to chill out together.
There you go, there you go. So as you can see in my pot right now, everything is boiling, which is beautiful. All right, you see how nice that's coming together. So to this, I'm now going to add my tomatoes. And today I'm using some crushed tomatoes. You can use diced, you can use any combination. You can use some crushed, some diced, some whole but pureed. You can use pureed. It really does not matter. It just depends on the consistency you're going for. So for this particular one, it's what I kind of had in my pantry, so I used a crush. But in the recipe, it says use diced can. And when you're using the diced can, you're using everything in the can. So you're using the liquid as well as the tomatoes, okay? And then once this is coming up, that looks good, I am going to add my paprika. I'm going to add a little bit of salt, not too much salt because I added stock that does have sodium in it. So it's not a low sodium or any type of vegetable stock, it's just regular vegetable stock. So there is some great flavor in there. All right, my black pepper. And then here I have my diced red and green peppers. That's also going right in. And as you guys can see, this is just such a colorful dish that even if someone isn't a vegan or vegetarian, I think they'll definitely try it. One of the tricks with dishes like this is I always say, give it to someone in the way that they're used to having it. So you spread this over some corn chips, with some cheese and it's toasted just like nachos, I don't think anyone is gonna question is there meat or not in it. The other thing with this is if you have kids that are picky, they tend to like stuff like this because it's fun. They get to play with their food while they eat because they can dunk bread in it, they can dunk a tortilla in it, they can add cheese and just do all sorts of fun stuff with it. So it's also one of the reasons why I particularly like this. So I'm going to cover this up and let it cook for a little bit. And then the last few ingredients that we're going to add is just the cilantro. And then once we add the cilantro, it's going to be pretty much done. So this is not going to take that long to cook because I cut my sweet potatoes nice and small. But if you cut your vegetables bigger, then it'll take a little bit longer. And like I said, even if you were to do this on the stovetop, like what I'm doing right now, and then you're like, oh my gosh, I need to run, do something else, you can actually take the entire thing and just cover it down and put it in the stove and finish it, in the oven, sorry, and finish it. Okay, so it's a very, I call it, it's just so fun and easy, so.
And you're going to talk a little bit about the notion of storing this. You know, you make a super big batch and you're going to put half of it away for later. What are some of the things? Say again?
I didn't hear what you said, sorry.
You're going to talk a little bit about storing the dish, that you make a double batch so that you can put half of it away in the freezer.
Krista?
You having trouble hearing me?
Krista?
Can you hear me, Chef? Chef, can you hear me? All right, folks, we appear to be having technical difficulties.
Hi.
Hi, Chef. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry.
No
I'm
worries.
trying a different device. Okay, any questions so far?
Yes. To make this with meat, would we
Yep.
cook the meat at the beginning and then add the same amount of the other ingredients? And would we still use the sweet potatoes? Are they a substitute for the meat, or would you put meat on in addition?
I personally would use both because I think the sweet potato blends very nicely. It adds another depth of flavor. So I would do both, or you can use regular potatoes. But if you're using ground beef, I wouldn't change anything else in the dish. Just add them in addition.
Okay.
So you can see how nicely this is coming together. I'm just going to turn my heat down because then I'll be wearing the tomato sauce all over my jacket, which is something I'm famous for doing. All right. Okay. So you can see how nicely that's coming together and stewy.
And you can hear it burbling away.
Yes. So now that I turned the heat down a little, now's the time I'm actually going to do some tasting and adjust my seasoning to suit if I need to. Yum. This actually doesn't need anything else. So I'm going to add my cilantro. And I love cilantro, so the more the merrier. Okay.
So here's a question. If you wanted to add quinoa, when would you add that in?
So you would add the quinoa when you're toasting the onions and your peppers, the onions, jalapenos, and garlic. You would add the dry quinoa right in there, toast it with everything so that you can also build some depth of flavor with your quinoa as well. And then you start adding your sweet potatoes and everything like that. And once you add your liquid, your quinoa will cook along and thicken this up. So once you add the quinoa, just be mindful, quinoa will swell and it will absorb liquid. So you're going to need to add way more stock and maybe more tomato product. So that's the only difference, but same process. So if you were adding the meat, you would add it at the same time. If you add in a grain, you would add it in the beginning and then build your flavors from there.
Great.
And that's why I said I love this dish so much, just because of exactly that. You can have so many options to give someone. The other thing is, even if you did not want to add the quinoa to this, you could cook your quinoa separate and then you just put a whole, put your quinoa in the middle of your bowl and smother it with the chili and then add your cheese on top. And it just becomes this big comfort bowl, I call it. So that's why, once again, it's so many different ways to eat this dish. All right. So as I added the cilantro now, I'm just going to let that sit for a minute or two. And then we're going to check our sweet potatoes, make sure they're cooked. And once our sweet potatoes are cooked, we are pretty much good to go. Okay, and they're literally about 95% done. So in another 2 minutes, we should be good to go. And as you guys can see how pretty that is. The colors are nice. The consistency is nice. And so going back to what can you do with this dish? So today I'm actually going to blister a tortilla and serve that on the side. And I'm also going to add some cheese on top. So that way you can literally just tear off pieces of your tortilla and dip it right in. If you have a gluten intolerance, then you might want to do a corn tortilla, which you can do exactly the same way, blister it the same way, and just use it as a dipping mechanism to eat your chili, or you can have it with none of the above. The one thing with this dish that I would also say is when you use it the next time around, a lot of times as individuals in the home and in the kitchen, we get used to doing things the same way. So because you call this chili, the next time you serve it, you must serve it as chili. With this dish, you don't have to. You can serve this dish with naan bread. You can serve it with a tortilla. You can serve it over white rice, brown rice, quinoa, grains. You can serve it simply with a whole bunch of toppings. One of the things I like to do, especially if you have younger individuals in your household that like to customize, you make a nice big bowl of this, and then you put sour cream and cheese and fresh cilantro and diced tomatoes and all these different condiments around, and you let everyone scoop what they want. The other great thing, you can have an avocado to this that makes it really nice and creamy. So the options are really just, I mean, the sky's the limit. So this is one of those dishes that you can pull out, like I said, make a bunch of it, freeze it in, you can freeze it in Ziploc bags if you don't have a lot of space at home. You put it in a Ziploc bag, you flatten the Ziploc bag out, let the air out, and you serve them, you know, you flatten them so that way when you stack them in your freezer, they're not picking up a bunch of space, okay?
Yeah, can you talk a little bit more about sort of storage and the idea about how we need to do that safely and easily? Like, what do you need to do?
Sure. So first of all, before you're going to put something in a Ziploc bag, you're going to want to cool it. And when I say cool, so from the time you make this, you're going to take out what you want to eat now and then put the rest in the refrigerator. And you want to make sure it's below 40 degrees. If you don't have a thermometer to check the temperature, obviously you want to make sure it's pretty cold, no warm spots or cooler and warmer areas within the pot. And then you scoop it out into a Ziploc bag, take the air out of it, and freeze it, or you can freeze it in Tupperware containers. Just make sure, try when you're using Tupperware containers, all the way to the top. So less air gaps means less ice crystals, okay? Or less area for ice crystals to form on your food. So that way you can store it for a longer period of time. And when I store mine, I actually use these plastic containers. A lot of times when you get Chinese takeout, you can get them with it. So I use these and just stack them in my freezer, or I use Ziploc bags, especially if you don't have a lot of space. Okay, so the key is making sure it's cool completely before you start freezing.
Okay.
All right, so as you guys can see, how beautiful that looks. I wish you guys were here to try this right now. So I'm actually going to finish that with the last bit of cilantro that I have. I'm going to put that all in. I'm not going to waste it.
And you use the stems as well as the leaves, right?
Yes, because this dish is not about it being dainty and pretty. So everything goes in. Even if you had a little bit of other things left over, so you were cleaning out the refrigerator and you found some carrots and you had some other vegetables that you wanted to add, you're more than welcome to. This is the perfect time to use it up, okay? And the way that I serve this, like I was telling you guys, I'm going to show you a little trick that I do at home with my kids. So I have an electric stove, okay? So the elements themselves get really hot. So what I do is I take my tortillas, and you don't need you can use a pan if you're scared to do this, but I take my tortilla, so just a plain old tortilla, rest it right on the element of the stove that has been cleaned, okay? And then I turn them over. So one, it warms it, and then it starts giving a nice blister to the tortilla. So it gives it a really nice flavor. Okay, and it starts bubbling. And then you'll start seeing the air pockets. There you go. Let me see if you guys can see this. Hold on. You can see that.
The lighting is a little tough for it.
Okay, so that's one. Hold on. Let me see. Okay, should be. Can you see now?
The tortilla is the bright light of the stove. You can kind of see it browning as you flip it.
Okay. And there we go. So it's all bubbly. I take that off. All right. Take my stove off, and now I have my tortillas that are hot and nice and blistered. Okay. I'm gonna take my bowl. You guys can see. Chili goes right in. I like cheese. So here I'm just using some extra sharp white cheddar. You can use yellow cheddar, you can use Parmesan cheese, any cheese that you like. And once that sits, my cheese is gonna get nice and melty. And then I'm just gonna take my tortillas and fold them in quarters and stick them with my bowl. All right, and that is your finished dish.
Beautiful.
See that? Okay.
Gorgeous.
I think that's as simple as it gets. It's one pot, it's easy, and it's very versatile with it. So hold on, let me see if you guys can see this. Can you see that? Can you see?
We did. We saw it over at the stove. It's beautiful.
Okay. And then now my chili is all done. So I'm just going to turn my heat off, cover this up, and then let it sit. And usually when I make chili at home, I like to let it sit for at least a half an hour before I eat it, just because same thing, it just helps everything to mellow out and all my ingredients are together and it just tastes so much better. Okay.
Terrific. And so you'll, in order to cool that down and store it, you'll wait for a half hour, then you'll put it in your fridge.
Usually what I will do is I try to get a wider container. So if I have something that's a little more flat, a little bit wider, whatever your fridge can accommodate, and then I take it out of the pot because the pot itself holds heat. So leave it for a half an hour on the stove or so to just cool down, and then add it to that wider container with no cover. Let it sit in the refrigerator, turning every half an hour or so until it cools completely, and then put it in your freezer containers. So we want that surface area. So the more surface area, the faster it cools, and the more likely you are to get it down to temp quickly. The deeper the container, the longer it takes, the more time you're spending in what we call the danger zone, which is in where bacteria grows the fastest. Okay, so.
Terrific. And what would happen if I put it straight into the freezer hot like that?
Actually, nothing. It would actually be beneficial. The only thing is if you have a very small freezer and you put such a hot item in it, it tends to form a whole bunch of crystals in your freezer, which is not fun. But if you have a wide freezer or a freezer that can definitely handle the capacity, it's perfectly fine because it'll actually come down to temp even faster than doing it in the refrigerator first.
Terrific. Well, Chef, thank you for sharing your Friday afternoon with us. We're jealous. We wish we were there with spoons with you.
I wish you were here too because it smells so good.
Blistered tortillas. All right, fabulous. Thank you so much. Oh, yep, fantastic. Thank you. Looks delicious in the comments. All right, awesome. Thank you, Chef. Take care.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.